This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, "Like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball." Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. My favorite teams in baseball history are the 1997 to 1999 New York Yankees. I was 10 in 1997, and I ended up getting to meet a number of the Dynasty-era Yankees. And when you're 10, there's nothing cooler in the world than that. So it was an absolute joy to relive so many of these vivid memories I have in Chris Donnelly's Get Your Tokens Ready. It follows the Yankees and the Mets from 1997 when they matched up in interleague play through the 2000 World Series when the two met. I forgot just how great those Mets teams were and how the 2000 World Series was far from a blowout and potentially even an upset. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. We're going to talk some 90s baseball, my favorite thing. I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea for the book come from? And this is kind of maybe a trickier question for you because this is a part of a trilogy, I guess you could say. This is not your first book about New York City baseball.
That is correct. So this is my 5th book overall. All 5 of them deal with the Yankees in some way. But to the point you just made, this is the last in what we can call a trilogy, which documents New York City baseball from 1985 to 2000. So the first book was my 3rd book, Doc, Donnelly, Kid, and Billy Brawl. That looked at the 1985 New York baseball season, and that was the Mets and Yankees, Mets on their way up, Yankees on the way down. 85 is where they meet in the middle. So I thought that would be an interesting story to tell, really. And then when I got done with that book, I sort of realized, well, the story isn't done with the Mets taking over New York. There's more to tell here, especially when Steinbrenner was banished from baseball and later changed to a suspension. So I wrote the next book, which is Road to Nowhere, which follows the Yankees and Mets from 1990 to 1996, ends with the Yankees winning the World Series in 96, and sort of reclaiming New York City and New York's baseball soul. And then I wanted to pick it up with the start of interleague play in 97 and go to the last out of the Subway Series, and then you sort of have this definitive owner of New York's baseball, heart and soul, with the Yankees. And so that's what Get Your Tokens is all about. Starts with interleague play and Mets and Yankees playing meaningful games in 97. And then ends with the Subway Series.
Before we get going too far, Get Your Tokens Ready. That is a Michael Kay reference, I believe, from his fit. Yeah, from his.
That is correct. Yeah. That is from Game 6 of the 2000 ALCS. David Justice hit a 3-run home run in the 7th inning off of Arthur Rhodes, who's a kind of famous Yankees punching bag. And the Yankees took the lead, and the Mets had already clinched the NL pennant. And so Michael Kay, who was on the radio back then, famously said, "Get your tokens ready," as everyone was anticipating the Subway Series. And Michael was gracious enough to allow me to use that for the title of the book. So I thank him for that.
That's great. You lived through these years. What was that research process like going back to revisit this time in New York City baseball here?
It was a lot of fun. So I started watching the Yankees. The first game I remember, I'm a Yankees fan. I'll just get that out up front. And the first game I remember was Andy Hawkins pitching and losing a no-hitter in 1990, right? So I started watching them when they were terrible and the Mets were great. And so the early years of being a Yankee fan were, if somebody hit, I remember Matt Noakes hit 2 home runs in a game once, and I was so excited. I thought that was the greatest thing that had ever happened to the team because there was nothing else to root for. And so looking back at these years when they're a dynasty and when the Mets are great and fun. And I grew up in North Jersey. Some friends who were Yankees fans. Most of my friends were Mets fans. And so to think back at that time period, I was in high school. It was just so much fun just to root for a winning team, to have the Mets-Yankees rivalry picking up, and just to be hanging out with my friends and talking smack and all that stuff. So to go back and revisit this era And as I'm writing, I go, oh, I remember watching that game. I remember game 6, Mets Braves, NLCS. I was in college, I was a freshman in college. And I remember my dad took me out to lunch at the start of the game. And then by the time the game was over, he'd already driven the hour and a half back to North Jersey. We'd already had dinner. Like that kind of stuff just pops in
Yeah.
your head. And so it was a lot of fun to go back, revisit, relive, and to learn some new stuff about that era.
You know what? I will segue from that. Was there anything that you were surprised to learn when doing research for this book?
I think, I mean, to learn, kind of forgot how much fun the Mets were of that era. I think because of how things turned out for them with the loss in the NLCS in '99, and obviously with the loss of the Subway Series, that's not really a period of time that Mets fans and the organization look back on and sort of go, oh, those were the days, and I really missed that because those teams were incredible. I think the '99 Mets, an argument can be made that they're one of the 3 best Met teams ever, at least the top 5. But go back and just see how much fun they were and how interesting they were and how a lot of their wins were walk-off, come from behind wins. I'd kind of forgotten about that. And one other thing, I wouldn't necessarily say I'd forgotten about this, but I think one thing that a lot of New York fans forget is Hideki Arabu was a really good pitcher for the Yankees over a certain period of time.
Yeah, he had some really good stretches. Yeah.
He was obviously, with everything that happened with him and his personality, and with the sad way that his life ended, it sort of tainted our memory of how good he actually was. The best pitcher in baseball in the first 3 months of the 1998 season was Hideki Arabu. And as the saying goes, you can look it up. You can look it up. He was the best pitcher in baseball. And he basically single-handedly carried the Yankees staff in the summer of 1999 when El Duque was hurt and Clemens was hurt and Conan Pettit weren't pitching as well. This is it's a good trivia question, right, for your listeners to stump people with. There's only one pitcher in the championship Yankees era, 1996 to 2000. Only one pitcher won AL Pitcher of the Month twice, and that's Hideki Arabu. So I think he deserves a little bit more credit than he gets, and I understand why he doesn't, for just how good he was at certain points in his career.
Let's go to 96. Let's kind of, right before the book starts here, we look back now at this sort of being a Yankee dynasty. And it was. I mean, it simply was. But by no means were they a shoo-in to win the World Series. I don't think they were favored 96. I mean, that was a great Braves team. And then, you come off this World Series win, kind of a little bit of an underdog story. Where are both of these teams in 1997?
It's an interesting point that the Yankees were actually likable in 1996, and they were sort of underdogs. And there's always going to be a group of people who hate the Yankees. But for a lot of people, it was kind of hard in 96. You had Joe Torre, who was this feel-good manager story. You had Derek Jeter, right, this young idol that people love. And so they were kind of likable. And then they win the World Series, and now they have a target on their back because they're champions. And then they get Arabu, which soured a lot of people because the circumstances by which that happened were highly questionable. And so it kind of starts to flip a little bit. And the next year they trade for Chuck Knobloch, and then the next year they trade for Roger Clemens. And that's the transition to the evil empire that I think is what a lot of people consider the Yankees now. That's not to say the Yankees were America's team before 1996. They weren't. But in 1997, that's all starting to happen. Really, people are really starting to hate them again, which I would argue, and we could spend an hour on this, is actually good for baseball. It tends to be good for baseball when that happens. But that's where they are. And the Mets are, the Mets had a surprisingly good 1995 season, and people were excited for 96, and they stunk in 1996. They were, I believe, 71 and 91. They fired their manager, Dallas Green, in August. They bring on Bobby Valentine. And Valentine says, this team isn't really good. I'm going to spend the remaining 96 analyzing and getting rid of who isn't working here and redeveloping the organization. And in 97, they surprise a lot of people. A lot of come from behind wins, very exciting team. They are not expected to compete. They go 88 and 74. They're in the hunt for the playoffs until the last week of the season. And that's sort of a wake-up call for the Mets fans and organizations that they actually have something here. That they're not the Mets of 1992 anymore. They're actually going to be fun to watch and might even be competitive with the Yankees.
We start off with a whole lot of Dave Malicki ink, which is fantastic. You don't hear a lot of Dave Malicki stories anymore. But we open up on interleague play. And another one of the things that interleague play now is not a big deal. I mean, yes, the Subway Series, when it happens, the Yankees and Mets fans show up. But it's not the same. Take us back to 1997, the very first Subway Series. This was a big deal, wasn't it?
This was huge. This was it. They'd never played a meaningful game. They used to have the Mayor's Trophy or Mayor's Cup game, which was fine for what it was. And then they would play in spring training, and that was fine. But really, George Steinbrenner was the only one who actually cared about any of that. So they had the first matchup in '97. And I mean, this is the place to be in New York. There's celebrities in the crowd in that first game. And I knew when I was starting to write this book that this is how I wanted to start the book, that I wanted to start with Dave Malicki, because I just think it's a wonderful example of how incredible baseball is. That Dave Malicki, the sort of journeyman pitcher who I think most fans probably wouldn't remember, unfortunately, without this one game. He's the guy who's on the mound against the Yankees in the first ever Mets-Yankees game. I mean, that in and of itself is just sort of strange. But then he goes out and pitches a 6-0 shutout, which is even stranger. I mean, everything he does works that night. And for 24 hours, the Mets, no matter what the World Championship record was, no matter what had happened over the last 7 years, the Mets were New York's team for one night. They ended up losing the next 2 games, but they had that moment, and they will always have that first victory, that 6-0 shutout forever, no matter what happens. And it was, I mean, New York, that was all people were talking about. And to your point, it's not the same now. It never will be. And this is not an old man yelling at cloud rant. It's just different. The way we watch baseball and the abundance of data and highlights that we have, it's never going to be the way it was in these matchups. And so hopefully people read this and it brings back fond memories for them.
We enter 97, Yankees kind of fall apart in the playoffs. It's a good team. It's a very good team, and they don't do it. I think we're probably one of the better teams in baseball that year, and they didn't do it. Coming into 98, they bring in Knobloch, big move there, and they have the best team I've ever seen. I think that's pretty fair to say. What works? Why does this team work so well? Do you have any idea?
I don't, and I'm not sure people do. I mean, if they do, I think they would replicate it. I think it's one of those things where obviously you have the talent, but everything just works out that year. I mean, you have people who all seem to be having career years, and they have this great 98 season, despite the fact that Knobloch isn't quite what he was in Minnesota. He's still a great leadoff guy. He still gets on base, but the defensive issues are starting to pop up. He's not hitting for average the way that he used to. And they still win 114 games in the regular season. You have Scott Brocious having an amazing season. He's an all-star. So, and I agree. I think that is the greatest team of all time. I know an argument can be made for the 27 Yankees and the 75 Reds. And I get it, because when you look at those rosters and you see the names, it's amazing. They're all Hall of Famers pretty much. But when you're talking about a team and you look at the actual definition of a team, it's the 98 Yankees for what they did and how they just rolled over the opposition that year. I mean, they start off 1-4 and they still won 114 games. They really only had one kind of bad streak in late September. They get into the playoffs. They have one scary moment against Cleveland, just plow over the Padres in the World Series, even though there were some close, exciting games. And I don't know if we will ever see a team like that again. We've seen teams win a lot of games. 2001 Mariners won 116 games, but we're not able to win a championship. I don't know if that kind of cohesion and those kind of seasons from everybody, pretty much. 6 guys won 10 games on that start in that rotation. That's crazy. I just don't know if we'll see that again.
It really was just top to bottom. Even the role players just contributing and making things. It's unbelievable.
I mean, on the bench, you have Darryl Strawberry and Tim Raines. One's a Hall of Famer, another guy who, if things had gone a certain way, probably would have been in the Hall of Fame. That's crazy when you look at, respectfully, the Yankees bench now and the guys who are on it. Yeah. To think that, I'll just put up future Hall of Famer Tim Raines here in the 8th inning. No big deal.
Yeah. Do you credit a lot of that to George Steinbrenner and his willingness to bring in these guys?
No, I don't. I credit it mostly to Gene Michael and to the scouting department and there's a bunch of guys, I won't go through all the names, but who did the legwork in the early and mid 90s to make these teams possible. The Yankees dynasty would not have happened if George had not been banished in 1990. And in those 2.5 years or so, they make wise draft picks. The biggest difference is they don't trade away key assets. George Steinbrenner wanted to trade Bernie Williams, tried to multiple times. Gene Michael sort of got the best of him and avoided that. He was willing to trade Mariano Rivera for Felix Fermin in 1996, who ended up, I think, having 8 more career at-bats after that trade proposal, because he didn't think Derek Jeter was going to pan out. So George does get credit for putting money into the team, which a lot of owners do not do. He was willing to do that. He knew so little about baseball, though, and about talent that it makes me laugh when people today say, well, if only George was around, things would be different. Yeah, they'd be worse. They'd be worse.
You hear this all the time.
All
Yes.
the time. All the
Yeah.
time. I 100% agree that if George was still in charge, Aaron Boone would not be the manager. Whether you agree with that or not, he wouldn't be. But the things he would have done, I mean, I think people just forget. And that's what a dynasty era and having a caricature of yourself on Seinfeld do. It makes people forget about how manic he was in the 80s. So, sure, I'll give him credit for being willing to put the money in. But in terms of the day-to-day baseball decisions, that was not him. That was other people.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book was all of the potential trade. Like, he's trying to ship out Andy Pettitte after he has a little, like, a rough strike. Like, so many guys is just like trying to move him. And it was wild to read about all that and kind of remember that as it's happened.
Yeah, he never really had faith in Pettitte, and Pettitte went through a rough patch, and George basically said, I want him gone. I don't think he's reliable. And Joe Torre and Mel Stottlemyre just sort of say, they had a deal in place. They were going to send him to Philadelphia for Adam Eaton and I believe one or two other people. And Stottlemyre and Torre both say, this is insane. Like, I can't even believe we're considering doing this. So George does what was a typical George thing. He goes, all right, we're not going to do it. But if this doesn't pan out, it's on you. It's not on me. It's on you. And luckily they didn't do it, because he goes on to be possibly the best pitcher in the history of the Yankees, maybe second or third, if you want to have that debate. But again, it just goes to show, the way I sort of describe Steinbrenner is he's the guy in the comments section of any story or social media post. He just, his instincts were just not good on baseball talent. But I am thankful that he was there and willing to invest the time and the money into the team, because they probably would not have gotten as far without that.
So 1999, I remember there's a Sports Illustrated cover with the Mets' greatest infield ever. That's a great team. I think that is a better team than the 2000 team. It is a fantastic team. What goes right? How do the Mets get to this point where they are now? I think they win 96 games that year. Is there a key move, something that really changes about this team that makes this get to this point?
Well, there's a couple moves. Bringing in Bobby Valentine, and people have strong opinions about Bobby Valentine, and having interviewed him for this book, I understand why. But he was the right guy for that moment and for that team. He was just the right attitude and the right amount of baseball intellect and fun to get things moving. And then they have Steve Phillips come in as general manager. And some of it is through the system. Edgardo Alfonso comes up and really develops into a key player 98, but 99 is when he really takes off. And I think many guys on the team would tell you that he's probably the MVP of that season in that team. And they signed Robin Ventura to play third base. The Mets had wanted Ventura for a really long time. They finally signed him. He's a great third baseman, one of the best defensive, but a huge offensive uptick in an organization. I mean, the Mets really hadn't had a solid long-term third base threat really in all their existence. It's one of the sort of the glaring things in their history is that for the first 30-something years, the third base is sort of a blank spot. And then, of course, there's the Piazza trade, which, I mean, happened essentially because the fans and the media were so angry that they didn't trade for him, and the Florida Marlins did. The Dodgers did not think they were going to re-sign Piazza, at least not for the money that he was asking for. He wanted to be the first $100 million contract. They weren't willing to do that. So they traded him to the Marlins, who were just finished having their fire sale post-championship, and they'd gotten rid of all their good players. And so New York fans, and Mike and the Mad Dog in particular, were like, how the hell does this franchise, which is shedding payroll, trade for the greatest catcher in the game? And a week later, they more or less forced the Mets to trade for Piazza, and he comes over. It's hard for him. Mets fans were very tough on him because they expected so much from him. And he puts up good numbers, but the sort of unfair labels that he can't hit in the clutch. And then 99 comes and he just explodes. And he hits like the Hall of Fame catcher that we all know now that he is. And when you add in all those elements, you end up having, like I said, one of the top 3, maybe top 5 best Met teams ever. And fun is the other thing too. Really fun to watch. A lot of great characters and attitudes, right? And you've got John Franco and some of the veteran presence. And then they have LA Woman, which becomes their theme song, in which they're playing after victories. And it was just a fun team to watch. And I think you could argue maybe more fun to watch than the Yankees, even though the Yankees are winning the championships. Because by that point, it's sort of become formulaic in how they were winning. And the Mets were just different.
Again, Yankees win the World Series once again. It's another sweep. This is full dynasty mode now. This is expected at this point. It seems like, Yankees are going to go to the World Series again, and they do. They face the Mets the very next year. This is not the same level of Yankee team the previous 2 seasons in 2000. It is a bit of a mismatch of kind of players. It's kind of cobbled together a little bit, but they still get there. And coming into that World Series, they're playing the Mets, who another great team. What are the predictions? Is it thought of as Yankees are going to steamroll them again, or is this thought to be a little bit closer?
The Yankees were showing some chinks in the armor at that point. They had ended the season in 2003 and 15, and it's one of the worst stretches in the entire history of the organization. And they were not the same team as they were in 98, 99. They'd had some injuries. They'd had some players who were not performing the way that I think they had hoped. And what you get, to the point you just made, is it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle where they're just sort of throwing in random pieces, whether they fit or not. It's how they end up with Jose Canseco, somebody who they signed by accident. They claim him off waivers from the Rays because Brian Cashman was afraid that he would end up on the Blue Jays and he didn't want to get yelled at by George Steinbrenner. So he says, I'll claim him, so I'll block any deal with the Blue Jays. And the Rays say, here, you can have him now. He's yours. And Joe Torre has no idea this is happening, no idea where he's going to play. So you have Jose Canseco, you have Glenn Allen Hill. They retrade for Luis Sojo, Jose Vizcaino, right? All these guys that just get tossed in like this kind of stew. And yet if you're a Yankees fan and you're hearing this, all those names I just said, you're pretty much going, oh yeah, well, Sojo got the hit and Glenn Allen Hill hit 40 home runs in 10 games. And it all worked. It all just happened to work out. But the Yankees were not the same in 2000. And the Mets actually finished with a better record. They weren't as good as the 99 team, and their outfield, it's kind of the most bizarre outfield you'll see on a World Series team in terms of what happened in their careers and the level of talent. This is not the Yankees are going to sweep, unless if somebody's being honest, right? Yankee fans are like, yeah, we're going to sweep. Mets fans are saying, no, we're going to sweep, that kind of stuff. But anybody being honest with themselves would say, this is going to be a tight, close series. I don't know if the Yankees are going to pull it out. And I think, in fact, some people were surprised the Yankees even made it that far. I don't think they thought they were going to beat the A's in the division series. So by no means was this sort of a gimme, a fait accompli when Game 1 of the Subway Series began.
Yeah. I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk about Roger Clemens and Mike Piazza. This is probably the thing that is most memorable about that World Series, is that one of the most bizarre incidents in baseball history that we somehow don't talk about every single day, because it is just absolutely bizarre. Obviously, the throwing the shard of the bat at Piazza. There's a little history here, though. Can you kind of take us through the Piazza Clemens history?
Yeah, earlier. So first of all, Clemens had a reputation for being a headhunter, and so much so that before he became a Yankee, a lot of players on the Yankees hated him, despised him. And so they trade for him. And the joke that Chuck Knobloch and Derek Jeter make the first day Clemens is there and he's throwing a simulated game is they dress up in all catcher's gear when they go to the plate, right? Breaks the ice. Everybody acknowledges he's on our team now, and so be it. But he has that reputation. There's a game in July 2000. It's part of a day-night doubleheader. It's when they split between playing the first game at Shea, playing the second game at Yankee Stadium. And in the second game, Clemens hits Piazza in the head. It's a scary moment. Piazza's on the ground, clearly dazed. Clemens claims that he tried to reach out and he never heard. And Piazza says that didn't happen. And the Mets are now they don't like Clemens. They're highly suspect. And in fact, I think Todd Pratt makes the joke that going into the World Series, well, we actually like the Yankees. Well, we like 24 of them, referencing Clemens as the guy they don't like. So they meet in Game 2 at Yankee Stadium in the first inning. It's the first time they faced each other since Clemens hit Piazza in the head. I'm fascinated by how the fact that this actually played out the way that it did, because so many things had to happen in order for this crazy moment to happen. Clemens pitches inside on Piazza. Piazza fouls the ball off, shatters his bat. So first of all, that has to happen. He has to shatter the bat and foul the ball off, right? The ball goes out of play. The barrel of the bat, which is this huge, most bats don't break in that manner, right? Pieces of them splinter off, but very rarely do they shatter completely like that and split in half. The barrel flies out towards Clemens. And it does so, if you watch the replay, it does so in such a crazy way where it kind of skids along the ground. But right before it gets to the pitcher's mound, it shoots up in the air and lands in Clemens' hands, which I've never actually seen happen again, ever.
No.
Any broken bat incident, I've never seen that happen. So Clemens takes it and fires it back towards the Yankees dugout. Piazza isn't sure where the ball is, so he starts running out of the box, and the bat misses him by a couple of feet. Piazza stops. He yells at Clemens, "What's your problem?" Clemens yells, "I thought it was the ball." Then he asks for the ball, and he just sort of zones out. And the bench is empty. No punches are thrown. Order is restored. And if one of those things that I just described doesn't happen, we're not talking about this right now. It never occurs. If the bat goes in a different direction, if Piazza doesn't run out of the box, it's all this stuff. All that said, and like I said, look, I am a Yankee fan, so I know that any Mets fans listening are going to roll their eyes at what I'm about to say. Clemens did not intentionally throw the bat at Piazza. I understand in the moment why that was the perception, and guys like Tim McCarver didn't help when they're on television in the minutes after talking about it and essentially laying blame at Clemens. And the replay that they show, you slow it down, and that's exactly what it looks like. If you watch the play in real time, it's very clear that Clemens has no idea where Piazza is. The bat comes up to him. And I actually do think in the instant that the bat came towards him, he may have thought it was the ball. But obviously, once he catches it, he knows it's not the ball. Yeah. That excuse didn't really hold water, but he just takes it and fires it away. And he wasn't aiming for him. But it's still inexcusable that he did that. I mean, he had what was essentially a weapon in his hands. And Clemens was way too amped up. And later in the game, you can actually see he throws a split finger fastball. And Jorge Posada tells him, "You got to calm down." So people can't see, but I'm putting my hands up in the calm down motion. And you can see it on television. And that's what the story of Game 2 becomes. And it's such a thing that 2 years later, because Clemens doesn't face the Mets in 2001, 2 years later, Sean Estes, who wasn't even with the Mets in 2000, is the guy who ends up trying to get retribution on Clemens by throwing at him in 2002. So it's crazy. It's just one of those fascinating moments where a smidgen of any of that going a different way, and it never happens, and we never talk about it.
That's great. So obviously, Yankees win the World Series. This is not a spoiler here. It was a much closer World Series than I think that people remember it as. Because again, it just kind of gets lumped into these Yankee dynasty years, like, oh, win, 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 win. No, it was actually a much better World Series than I think people give it credit for.
Yeah, they see 5 games, and if you didn't know any better, you'd go, well, okay. But the tying or winning run was at the plate at the end of the game for every game in that series. The Yankees win the first game in extra innings. They tied it in the bottom of the ninth. Game 2 was a laugher until the ninth inning. It was 6-0 Yankees. Then it was 6-3. Then Jay Payton becomes only the second player ever to hit a postseason home run. And the last one off of Mariano Rivera. Now it's 6-5. So that kind of gave the Mets hope going into Game 3. They win Game 3 in the bottom of the 8th inning. They get 2 runs off of El Duque. Game 4 is a 3-2 game, I believe, after the 4th inning. And the Mets can't tie it. The Yankees can't add any runs. So it's still tense. And then Game 5 is kind of a back and forth affair. Yankees take a 1-0 lead. Mets make it 2-1. Yankees tie it, and it's a tie game into the top of the ninth. I won't relive that whole moment in case any Mets fans are listening. The Yankees eventually end up winning. And the last at bat of the game is Piazza against Rivera. And I think you talk to anybody who was watching or who was there, and they will tell you that when Mike Piazza hit that fly ball to end the World Series, they thought it was a home run. Joe Torre thought it was a home run. Jorge Posada thought it was a home run. I thought it was a home run watching as a fan. I still watch that replay today and do not understand how that ball did not go 500 feet because it looks like he crushes it, but he doesn't make it. It lands before the warning track, and that's the last out. But there's so much drama, putting aside the Clemens Piazza stuff, which certainly added to it. There's so much drama in the individual games itself. It might be one of the, if not the best 5-game series in World Series history.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What does this World Series do? The post-World Series, does this change the baseball landscape in New York City, or is it still kind of par for the course?
I think for the Mets, it's, I couldn't even say bittersweet. Making the World Series and losing to the Yankees is hard, but it has expectations that they will continue to win. And that's not what happens. It's actually the opposite. And so 2001 does not play out as they had hoped. And then by 2003, there's sort of a 1993 version of the Mets again. And despite they've signed, it's the early 90s Mets again. They've signed big names. They get Mo Vaughn and Roberto Alomar and Tom Glavine, and none of it works. And they never really recapture that until 2006, but it takes a while. The Yankees go back to the World Series in 2001. And so obviously that World Series has a whole different meaning because of the events of 9/11. But the biggest thing for them in terms of winning that World Series is that they now have those bragging rights, because as Paul O'Neill will tell you and a couple of other guys will tell you, it didn't matter that they'd won 3 World Series before that. If they had lost to the Mets, none of that would have mattered. George Steinbrenner would never have let them hear the end of it. And so to think that the Mets would be New York's team despite everything the Yankees had done would be unfathomable to George. And so if nothing else, those guys were relieved that it had happened. And so I think ultimately it's a bigger, for the obvious reasons and the not so obvious reasons, it's a bigger change for the Mets than it was for the Yankees.
Yeah. This was really kind of a golden era of New York City baseball. Is this similar to what we're experiencing today, or is it a little bit different, you think?
I think it's different. I think what we're seeing now is great, and I hope for a variety of reasons, including book sales, that there's a Subway Series this year. But it is just the way we watch baseball and the access we have to information is so different now than 25 years ago that it's just not the same. So I don't know if I can call now a golden age. I think there's a saying, right, that the age that you grew up watching baseball in is always the golden age. And it's true for everybody. But I do think there's really 2 distinct New York City golden ages, and that's the 1950s and the late 90s and that 2000 season. I think we're close now, but just some of the differences are there's more rounds in the playoffs, is relatively easier to make the postseason. There isn't as much animosity between the 2 teams. I mean, nobody on the Yankees really hates Juan Soto. That's a fan thing, and that's gonna go away after a couple of years. And so that kind of friction isn't there, right? I mean, the Dodgers and Giants disliked the Yankees in the 50s, and there was some animosity between the Yankees and Mets in the late 90s. The whole Clemens thing sort of added to it. That's not really there now. So it's an enjoyable time, and it's great baseball to watch. But I think we're just short of being able to call it a golden era. Now, that might change. That might change after October. And then we can do this again, and I'll tell you I was wrong.
Well, Chris, the book is fantastic. It brought back so many great memories for me, and it just made me happy to read. And it is just a wonderful time in New York City baseball history. I loved it. I had such a great time. And thank you for taking the time to talk. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
That was Chris Donnelly. His book, Get Your Tokens Ready, is available now. Coming on to close us out is Lindsay Borden, reading an excerpt from her piece, Inheritance, from our 20th issue.
7th inning stretch. We stand up to stretch, my dad and we stay up. With my father aging and the challenge of exiting the stadium increasing, we now start our lead-taking 2 or 3 innings early. Slowly, carefully, we wend our way down, pausing now and then to watch play, so that we're safely at ground level well before the final out. Top of the 8th. As we linger to admire the field from so close and catch the last innings, an usher, an old guy, though not as old as my dad, comes up. Instead of shooing us off, he ushers us forward. Take a seat, anywhere. It's early-ish in the season, the score uneven, the game unmemorable, the seats already emptying out. We sit back in our excellent borrowed box seats, my law-abiding father relishing the idea that we snuck into the deluxe level. As the half-inning ends, he asks, "Did I ever tell you about the time I got Babe Ruth's autograph?" Bottom of the 8th. I just stare at him. No, he did not.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,